Tigray. Hello and many thanks for joining us. You're watching Addis News Hour with the news. I'm Tabitha John. Do stay with us. The current ruling government of Ethiopia says it has accepted the ceasefire proposed by the interim administration of Tigray. The move, if succeeds, would have paramount importance to alleviate humanitarian, socio-economic, and political hurdles of the Tigray regional state. The interim government of Tigray recalled the calls of the reformist government, which provided ample opportunities through forgiveness with the power of love. However, the interim administration now calls both sides to refrain from life-endangering acts to normalize situations in Tigray, thereby creating conducive situations with the central government and move forward to benefit the whole people of the country. The Western world uses different mechanisms to flog down Africa by creating parallel governments or an inflicting force. This was discerned in the Tigray crisis in Ethiopia, as they attempted to create a route for the TPLF junta to escape out of the country, as few NGOs and UN agencies attempted for such frivolous acts. However, the national military deterred their wrong acts at the time. Still, they have been echoing the wrong cries of the terrorist group of TPLF under the disguise of human rights violations. Kasahun Chani tells you more.
It is time for Africa to awaken itself. Today, there is a serious urge for all citizens to pay the heed about Western interference in Africa, so as to work on the future of Africa and bring better time for Africans by ending up incessant oppression of the economically and technologically developed Western states. To this effect, all Ethiopians must ferociously fight all sorts of injustice that come from the West, especially in this time, as it has become evident for some Western nations tightening unnecessary pressure on the national interest of the country. From this vantage point, scholars, academics, activists, and critics severely denounce the West for their unendurable and ruthless influence on the developing world countries. They are tightening their neo-colonialism, or perhaps call it neo-slavery, using any divisive West to destabilize Africa and the rest of the developing world through financing war in a way, first, to easily enjoy exploiting developing world resources, and second, they will be able to remote control in the internal affairs of the poor nations in such a way they can easily expand their sphere of influence. It has been learned from history that the West have sponsored and played up conflicts, then fuel it up to war, and later on pretend as good arbitrators and peace lovers by confusing the rest of the world with their so-called academic and research jargons in the direction it fits so well to their interest. Today, also one can easily deduce the rationality of the West from what is going on in Ethiopia and learn the overall undue interference of the West in local matters of the developing world. This is indeed the time in which all need to get lessons from what's happening elsewhere. As history repeats itself, now the undue influence of the West has become quite evident in Ethiopia in connection with the Tigray region's crisis. For this, one can easily figure out what is going on now in Ethiopia and can examine Western interference on local matters based on the following key aspects. The West used different mechanisms to flog down Africa by creating a parallel government or an inflicting force. This was described in Tigray crisis in Ethiopia. They attempted to create a route for TPLF junta escape out of the country As few NGOs and United Nations agency attempted to force such frivolous acts despite national military deterred their wrong acts at the time. Still, there have been a current wrong crisis of the terrorist group of TPLF under the disguise of human rights violations. The West used different humanitarian and donor organizations as a pretext for their hidden motives. Sometimes such organizations are found being engaged in illegal acts. Not only this, but also some Western interest groups and lobbyists try to maneuver Ethiopian government interests for their selfish interests. For example, certain human rights groups, media and non-personalities wrongly interpreted Ethiopian government's action with effort to work towards the respective rule of law in the Tigray region in particular and the nation in general. The West also uses human rights issues as an instrument to wrestle African hands, as it has been observed recently in Ethiopia. The West boils up the problems in Tigray as if there is serious human rights violations. However, what they are trying to make is a much exaggerated truth. It is in fact something undeniable that there could be human rights violations amid of any war anywhere in the world. But the question is, what is the reason why things got exaggerated and so much propaganda was made against the Ethiopian government?
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has today met with political party heads this morning, a week after the 6th national elections. On the meeting, the Premier has expressed his gratitude to party heads for their contribution in enabling a peaceful election in the country. They also discussed assessments of challenges and gaps that surfaced during the elections and the lessons learned in the process with a view to strengthen the democratization process in Ethiopia. It is to be recalled that Ethiopia conducted the 6th general election on June 21, 2021, with a high voter turnout. The second round of the election is also expected to be held in some parts of the country on the 6th of September. Minister of Transport Dagmawit Moges says African states need to enhance infrastructure development to ensure regional integration. Executive Secretary of ECA, Vera Songwe, for her part, underscored infrastructure as a key element for the African Continental Free Trade Area. The remarks came while Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Sudan infrastructure ministers met at ECA to assess Lapset Corridor project in Ethiopia. Goshumelso reports.
The Lapset Corridor program is a regional flagship project intended to provide transport and logistics infrastructure aimed at creating seamless connectivity between the Eastern African countries of Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. The project connects a population of 160 million people in the three countries. Ministerial meeting has been held in Addis Ababa on Monday to assess the performance of Lapset Corridor project. Addressing ministerial meetings, Minister of Transport Dagmawit Moges said African states need to work closely to enhance insufficient infrastructure and bring intra-regional integration.
As rate of infrastructure penetration in Africa is still insufficient, African states need to closely work together to bring intra-regional infrastructure integration with the main aim of improving the continent's connectedness that shall benefit the entire population through trade and socialization.
Even though the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement has been launched, it is lagged behind due to the surge of COVID-19. UN Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ECA Vera Songwe underscored that the infrastructure development helps to realize the FCFTA.
In the beginning of this year, January 1, we launched the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, but it cannot and will never deliver on its promise if we do not have the infrastructure logistics that can connect our peoples and our countries. And so this is an important part of that process.
African Union High Representative for Infrastructure Development Raila Odinga underlined that the Lapset Corridor has the potential to boost Africa's regional social-economic integration through infrastructure development and trade.
Sad as the backdrop is, it is an opportunity for us to renew our commitment to the dream of regional and continental integration by way of infrastructure. This period of pain is also a good time to enhance our efforts to strengthen the ties that bind us as a continent. We realize now more than ever that we need closer cooperation in areas like public health.
South Sudan's Transport Minister representative for his part said the three nations should work together to aspire the intended outcome.
The drive to have this program comes into fruition, demonstrates that the region has been craving for shift in transport policies that advocate for regional integration, economic development, and social inclusion as a starting point, particularly as the region looks into the future full of uncertainty.
Lamu Port, which is underway at a cost of $480 million, is one of the sub-projects included in the Lapset Corridor project.
Ministry of Foreign Affairs has today announced the repatriation of 2,257 undocumented Ethiopian migrants from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The ministry stated that concerted efforts are well underway in partnership with various stakeholders to repatriate all Ethiopian compatriots in Saudi Arabian detention camps. Yesterday, Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced the repatriation of 1,931 undocumented Ethiopian migrants from Jeddah and Riyadh on Saturday. Returnees were accorded a warm welcome from officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other dignitaries upon their arrival at Bole International Airport.
It's now up to Egypt to come on board and agree with us that we are going to share these waters.
So Ethiopia is basically saying, rain falls onto the ground, forms a river, we just want to use it to generate power.
You people have got rain, these were the British. So you people in the tropics, you have got rainwater, so you don't need the river water. Of course, we have now rejected this.
Some countries rely on this water more than others, or are thinking about it more than others. But that does not give them any more right on the use of this water than others. The colonial agreements cannot be accepted as valid anymore.
ህዳሴ ዛሬም በተለያየ መንገድ የሚደረግ ማንኛውም የቅኝ ግዛት እሳቢዎችን የማናስተናግድ በአፍሪካ ነፃ የሆነች ሀገር ብቻ ሳይሆን በአፍሪካ ነፃ ሆና የምትቀጥል ሀገር መሆኗን የምናረጋግጥበት ፕሮጀክት ነው።
You're watching Addis News Hour. Other mediators on GERD than African nations may well serve the interests of their friends. As much as Ethiopia respects the agreement it signed with Sudan and Egypt, the downstream countries are repeatedly breaching those agreements. Santayo Tamrat reports.
While Ethiopia prefers the EU-led trilateral negotiation over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, Egypt and Sudan have been opting to the involvement of parties other than Africanists and the African Union. President of US-based IPAC Global, a movement that advocates robust Ethio-America ties, says the Nile is an African river and disputes over this river shall be solved by Africanists.
Even if we insist on having somebody else to sit on the negotiating table. I believe the AU is the most relevant and logical observer because this is an African river, and we are talking about 10 different African countries in Northeast Africa and in Eastern Africa. Okay, so logically the most relevant observer to this is the African Union.
Haymanot is skeptic that other mediators younger than African nations may serve the interests of their friends.
If you consider other parties like the US, EU, and the UN, they will always have their own self-interest when they come to the negotiating table. Trust me, they will not have Ethiopia's self-interest at heart. So when they come to the table, including the Arab League, they will have their own interest or the interests of their friends, okay? Or powerful friends or strategically important friends. So for this reason, I don't believe these parties we mentioned earlier, the US, the Europeans, or the Arab League will be impartial to these negotiations. When you look back in history, these countries and these parties are always have colonial, transactional, and imperialistic ambitions in Africa. So in these negotiations, it is more than reasonable to think that they will have the same attitudes once again. So they will try to force and squeeze Ethiopia to agree to something that is not favorable to Ethiopia and Ethiopians.
A Pan-Africanist researcher from the Netherlands says much as Ethiopia respects the agreement it signed with Sudan and Egypt, downstream countries are repeatedly breaching it.
They do have an agreement in 2015 with that DOP, which clearly stipulates that any issue between these three tripartite countries should be resolved within them without any fourth party involvement. And as we have seen, this was breached in 2019 by Egypt when they turned to the US. Ethiopia innocently accepted that, and US has led the negotiation. Actually, there were observers from October to February until Ethiopia walked out of that negotiation when they see the final resolution, which only serves the interest of Egypt.
Ethiopia is preparing to undertake the second phase filling of the Gerd Reservoir in July.
Welcome back again. The Ministry of Trade and Industry proclaimed it has been undertaking unwavering efforts to completely satisfy national edible oil demand with domestic production. The ministry deems it crucial for the economic transition of Ethiopia. Trade and Industry Minister Melaku Alebel said this strategy is pivotal to reduce domestic consumption in the country. Kasahun Chani reports.
The discussion held on the challenges facing Ethiopia's efforts to cover the consumption of edible oil by local industries deems crucial for addressing supply problems. Trade and Industry Minister Malakwa Level said the strategy is pivotal to satisfy domestic consumption and to reduce the cost of living across the nation.
The forum is about to deal with strong market linkages forward between the agricultural and industrial sectors and enable the concerned bodies to ensure structural transformation in the economy. Our ministry is striving to reduce domestic consumption in the country, which is also pivotal to trim down the cost of living. Ethiopia is expected to consume 906 million metric tons of edible oil in next year. Now efforts are underway to alleviate the shortage of imports and replace them with domestic production. There are 26 large, 206 medium oil production industries in the country.
Participants on the part stated that the government of Ethiopia should work being hand in glove with the edible oil manufacturers, adding modernizing the agriculture sector is pivotal to maximize the productivities of the edible oil seeds.
As edible oil crops are mostly grown around the lowland areas of the country, most of it needs government's effort. The government should create conducive working environment, particularly on how to use the unused plots of land. So on the basis of that, the government, which I firmly believe should work hard to the productivity of the agricultural sector through mechanization, availing garage, fertilizers and irrigation in various ways.
During the occasion, the forum deliberated on the major problems of the oil industry by the Ministry of Trade and Industry and Food and Pharmaceutical Industry Development Institute.
Addis Ababa City Administration has announced a plan to inject 3,000 more buses to the mass transportation sector in a bid to address a growing transportation demand in the capital. Office of Public Procurement and Property Disposal Service stated that preparations have been finalized to procure 200 city buses soon and deploy them to the system. According to head of the office, the 3,000 buses are tailored to alleviate the long-standing transportation problem in the city in the long run, as the 200 are aimed for short-term purpose. He said the city administration has dispatched many rental buses into the transportation system to alleviate the serious problem in the capital. Japanese ambassador to Ethiopia said Ethio-Japan bilateral ties are exemplary for other African countries, adding that the two countries have good relations in various fields. The government of Japan is tirelessly working to make Tokyo 2020 a sign of unity and solidarity to the rest of the world. Haptamwa Shagri has more.
Over the past many decades, Ethiopia and Japan have enjoyed remarkable bilateral ties in various fields. Talking to TV, the Japanese ambassador to Ethiopia, Ito Takako, said Japan and Ethiopia have exemplary ties to other countries.
Japan and Ethiopia share many things. One would be the love for sports, and both countries, people like long distance running. Although Ethiopia these days are much better performers. Nevertheless, I think that shows a life of person themselves. Yeah, it is a long journey, but through your hard work, perseverance, and never give up and hope, you will reach the goal. And sometimes it may not be as glorious as you had expected, but what you try is more important.
Ita said the well-known Ethiopian athlete Abebe Bikila was a courageous person and example of feminist to the rest of the world.
We like the people, the strong athletes, coming from not so, how to say, blessed environment, but showing the world that we can do. So I think Abebe Bikila is a symbol of this human courage and human power, that with all the hard work and perseverance, you can succeed. And also the name, Abebe Bikila, is so easy to pronounce for the Japanese people.
According to Ito Takako, Japan is tirelessly working to make Tokyo 2020 so vital to promote technology innovations to the world.
We are also trying to pass on to the future Japan is showing some of the futures. For example, the technologies. We are having all those robots extensively used both in the asset village or in the venue, or autonomous cars, autonomous buses providing transportation. And hydrogen energy used fuel, the cars are also used. And a lot of technologies will be introduced.
Information obtained from the embassy is showing the two countries are currently working in gender, education, water, technology transfer, and various fields.
I would like to... Yes.
You've been watching Addis News Hour. A quick reminder of the day's headline. Ethiopian government accepts the ceasefire proposed by the interim administration of Tigray. And that's all we had for now. I'm Tabitha John. Many thanks for watching. Good night.